Mr. Chairman.
I call Clayton Mitchell.
And just to the point of order that was just mentioned before by Mr Woodhouse, I think I'll start with the naming of this bill. And I think this government loves to use acronyms that confuse the most of us out there in the real world who understand what the real world is about. So I've got an acronym here that I think sums up this piece of legislation, and it's the OMG YOLO #NoFuture bill. Now, I know everybody back home, the younger ones particularly, will totally get what I mean, because this bill gives no future to our New Zealanders that need this future the most. Mr Speaker, I have many times stood up in this House and said that New Zealand First is not in the game of opposing bills that the government puts forward if they make sense. If there's any sense to a piece of legislation, New Zealand First would support them. And just to that, Mr Ducey, Matt Ducey, just let me say, we supported the bill yesterday, the Telecommunications Development Levy Bill, because that makes sense. This bill, however, we could not even remotely get the furthest, widest ranging view to come up with any conclusion that this is good for the future of New Zealand. That's right. This bill is absolutely against what this country should be standing up for, and it's the people's future. Now, in 2006, the Labor government came up with the KiwiSaver amendment, legislation, which kick-started Kiwis off to get them thinking about their future with a $1,000 kickstart incentive. Now, I took advantage of that, and I'm sure everybody on the other side of the bench took advantage of that, even if they weren't in politics, because it made sense too. And it doesn't matter what compounding interest rate you're going to be using there, Mr Bailey, whatever that is, if you want to make it 5% under your calculations and say it's only going to be a $24,000 a year, or if we're going to be using 10%, and let me remind you, 10% is conservative at the moment, when the KiwiSaver AMP investment scheme is averaging out at 16.8% at the moment. I know this because I've just changed it into a bit more of a dynamic fund. All right, it's getting 10% is going to give you a heck of a lot more. Even if it's $100,000, $145,000, you're taking money away from Kiwis. Short-sighted for the future of New Zealand, I have to say, Mr Bailey, that you can justify it by saying even $23,000 isn't enough. I dare say when you retired at 65 years old, $23,000 would go a long, long way. Now, we've heard from people emailing and calling us over the last few days, Mr Speaker. I love to say I've got some faxes, but we don't have fax machines anymore. We've actually moved into the 21st century. But there is I don't do the fax thing, no, Mr Ian Galloway. My father does, and if he could, he'd send me smoke screens. You know, he doesn't even text. But the point being is, we have had grey power come and speak to us with some serious, serious concerns. Now, this population that we are currently living in is like an hourglass population, a very, very bulbous population of ageing people at the top, a very, very skinny working class people, those that are actually of the age to work, and a very, very large bulbous group of young people coming into the workforce. The point being, if we're not thinking long term now, I know Mr Matt Ducey, you're trying to create your perfect wife there, but this is a very serious curve that we're talking about. I apologise to the people back home that just got an earful with me hitting the microphone. But we're seriously, if we don't start thinking about the future and get this government to think about this legislation in the way that they vote, we are going to have this population that are now currently working out starving on the streets with very, very little money to support them. I mean, we've got, Mr Chair, I'm sure you've got some investments that would make your life...
into this.
I apologise. But the point being is, if we do not think about the future of our New Zealanders now and bring this legislation back into fold, then we're going to have some grave concerns for the future. I have to say I had another phone call from a gentleman who is a constituent of in Tauranga, who's also contacted the local minister of Tauranga to put his concerns forward. He was right in the very stages of signing up his 3 children aged 4, 6 and 9 years old to the KiwiSaver program. Yeah. We are talking about filling out the forms to get them sent in. But this retrospective piece of legislation, which takes effect going back to the early start of this week, since Thursday of this week, stops his ability to be able to get that and his children signed up to it. In fact, it was just last week, my wife and I were talking about the same thing for our 3 young children. We should be thinking about getting them signed up. The reality is, how many New Zealanders are missing out because of this quick fire, from the hip, shooting out the legislation, pulling the rug from underneath the carpet from underneath their legs, and not giving them the ability to get themselves into a time. Mr. Chair.
Clayton Mitchell.
Thank you. And give themselves the time that they require to ensure that they've got the means to actually put that into place. Now, 2 years would not be unreasonable. When you look at all the legislation that's coming through now, you know, a 2 to 4 year time period of what they're talking about, the government talks about with implementation of bills, that would not be unfair. In fact, there's a supplementary order paper on the table today by Mr. Fletcher Tabato, which actually, if it could get supported, might be a little bit more palatable than cutting the legs off before we've got the chance to actually speak to it. Mr. Chair, we strongly hope that this government reconsiders this motion. To that end, we understand the fiscal constraints of any government, and this government, which with its bad budgeting over the past 7 years, is clearly having some issues with getting the books to balance up. So we understand that some cuts need to be made, but it is a zero-sum game. When you're giving $25 a week to the people that need it the most, and hey, look, at the end of the day, a little bit helps. I don't think it helps enough. I think taking GST off food would help far more of our poor, starving, impoverished people than giving them a $25 a week handout. Taxing food to me is just obscene. But at the end of the day, you've given that forward, and well done to that. But at the end of the day, taking it away from their future is absolutely crazy thinking. I would like you to reconsider what you're doing there, because if you even thought about looking after the fiscal constraints and reducing the $1,000 kickstart to even $500 in 2 years' time, we could probably understand that, hey, decisions need to be made. But what about the uncollected taxes? And again, where credit's due, I'll give the credit to the government. In the latest budgets coming out now, you've just put in $79 million, $74 million to increase the ability and the money so we can actually go out and get the tax that needs to be collected. 29 million of that, 40% of that $74 million increase is going to specifically be targeted at those people that are using their housing schemes, their residential properties to increase the tax that we can get loading. The rest of that money should be going into corporate tax evasion. When we've got the very wealthy, we're talking about the people that have got hundreds of millions of dollars in this country that are gloating that they only pay 12 to 15% tax when the rest of us are paying more than our fair share. And why shouldn't we be? Because we owe it to society. The money at the moment sitting in the red is about $7 billion. $7,000 million that is an uncollected taxes. If this government spent some of that money to go and collect, we could actually afford to do both. Mr. Chair, $25 a week as well as a Kickstart KiwiSaver program makes good sense. Good economic sense for the now, good economic sense for the future. Mr. Chair, we do not support this bill in its current form, and we would like to see this government change the way it's thinking about the future of New Zealanders. Thank you, Mr. Chair.